these aircraft should swing out over the Mediterranean and go straight across the narrow part of Israel, how long would it take them then?
Oh, seconds.
Second.
From the beginning of statehood in 1948, Israel has seen itself vulnerable to attack by surrounding Arab states.
In less than 60 seconds, the capital, Jerusalem, is under attack. 40 seconds later, Ben Gurion Airport, our lifeline with the outside world. In less than 4 minutes, Tel Aviv, the coastline. These are the hair-trigger margins with which we live.
What has always united Israelis is the underlying fear of losing their home, built on the ashes of the Holocaust, and the need for a strong military, today the most powerful in the Middle East. This story is about one of the chief architects of Israel's defense, a man who today urges peaceful compromise based on that military strength. A hawk-turned-diplomatic dove, Shimon Peres. A former prime minister, he worked for much of his life in secret, building Israel's military might and its nuclear weapons. As his nation's chief from 1984 to 1986, and during subsequent unsuccessful bids to regain leadership, Peres has been obsessed with leading Israel out of its historical trauma to a new reality of negotiated peace with the Arab states and the Palestinian people.
אני עומד בפניך בפני חקירה? אתה חוקר אותי?
Ironically, almost tragically, it is in Israel where he has met a wall of resistance from those who believe that compromise would amount to national suicide.
אתה לא רק לא, אתה רק לא. לי יש דברים כן ולא. פלסטינאים כן, אש"ף לא.
כן ולא. כן ולא. This is the old melody. Now he has to go.
I think that Shimon Peres is not a politician.
He is an unsuccessful politician.
Shimon Peres has done for Israel much more than any other politician. He's a man of action, and he has done.
In December 1987, Peres' peace efforts took on prophetic dimensions when the Palestinian uprising erupted on the West Bank of the Jordan and the Gaza Strip, areas occupied by Israel during the Six-Day War nearly a quarter of a century ago. A grassroots rebellion of stones, not fighter planes. It shook Israelis into painful examinations of the price they must pay for both security and peace.
We don't want the Arabs in their government.
This is what I'm hearing a lot. You know what I'm hearing from people? It's better the religious people than the Arabs.
Certainly.
This is what I'm hearing everywhere. That scares me.
Why should it scare you?
That really scares me. Don't the Arabs have a right to live here?
No,
Why?
they should go to their countries. There is no way to live together.
And you want an eye for an eye? Aren't we different? Aren't the Jewish people slightly different? Have the Jewish people learned anything from the Holocaust? And because of that, I said that I want to go from this country. Because of you, and because of the three people, there is no hope.
It's better your people outside the country than inside the country.
Okay, bye-bye.
Around the world today, new political initiatives are emerging, but here in the Middle East, there are none. While Peres, just a few months ago, did succeed in overthrowing a Likud-led coalition government that held on to policies of refusal, he has yet to regain the peace momentum. We now explore Peres' role in Israel's historic struggle and the decisions still to be made. He was born in 1923 in Poland, and already as a youngster joined his family and Jews across Europe in dreaming of living in their ancestral home of Palestine.
The issue was pogroms, the issue was Jewish alienation in the world and Jewish vulnerability. A home in which Jews could be normal, because the growth of nationalism in the 19th and 20th century said that you'd only make it in the world if you're part of a nation state.
But there was also an Arab nationalist movement in Palestine, ruled after World War I by the British Mandate. The British had promised both Arab and Jewish nationalists their respective homes in Palestine. By the 1930s, Jews streamed into the region, escaping European anti-Semitism, among them Shimon and his family. They found a land of tensions and turmoil, and some pleasure. Tel Aviv, where they settled on the Mediterranean shores. An oasis in the violent Middle East. And also a haven for the working class, such as Shimon's family. The boy was soon drawn to the workers' movement. And on May Day in 1936, he attended a Zionist labor rally and was swept up by the speaker's cries for settling the land.
They spoke very emotionally. The labor is here to build a nation. We are the pioneers. We have to do it. We have to work at it. I was touched to my bones. The crowd was totally taken, totally excited, totally part and parcel of something new and promising. And I was sitting there like a young boy who was invited to pay a quick visit to a paradise.
He joined the socialist youth movement, and at age 13 he left his family to live at Ben Shemen, a children's village founded for Jewish orphans smuggled out of Europe. It was a special place. Even Hollywood filmmakers documented this village of peace in a land of war.
Come in, you won't disturb us. I want you to see where I live.
Ben Shemen was surrounded by Arab villages, and while a haven of tranquility existed inside, outside the Arab-Jewish struggle flared, and young Shimon did not escape it. By the 1930s, the Jewish leadership, led by David Ben-Gurion, had organized an underground army, the Haganah, to realize the Zionist national aspirations. And inside Ben Shemen, Shimon joined the Haganah youth. As exciting as it was, it also brought the teenager face to face with the painful realities of Arab-Jewish relations. Ben Shemen's founder and principal, Dr. Ernst Lehman, was part of an international pacifist group led by scientist Albert Einstein and philosopher Martin Buber. They opposed the creation of a Jewish state alongside an Arab state. They sought the creation of one binational state, with Arabs and Jews living under one flag, one government. And here at Ben Shemen, Peres experienced coexistence firsthand. Mahmoud Abu Hamid was one of the Arab youngsters and still lives today near Ben Shemen.
I remember Peres, always active, organizing things all the time. And I knew he was one of Ben-Gurion's boys. Dr. Lehman didn't like Ben-Gurion's ideas because he thought that creating two states, one Arab, one Jewish, would lead to war. Dr. Lehman wanted one state for all, to live in peace.
At the night, we were watching, guarding, answering fire. And during the day, we tried to go around and meet with the Arabs. Every Saturday, we used to go out of the village and visit another Arab village, try to talk to the people. So it was as contradictory and as strange as one can think of.
Neighbors by day, enemies by night. Life in Peres Youth Village became a metaphor for the country as a whole. After Ben Shemen, a stint at farming at a communal settlement near the Sea of Galilee. He married and started a family. But the excitement of politics and the chance to work with David Ben-Gurion drew him back to Haganah headquarters in Tel Aviv. Ben-Gurion was leading the campaign for the creation of a Jewish state alongside an Arab state.
And Ben-Gurion invited me to go with him to a certain lecture. He gave me a ride in his car. I was very excited. All of a sudden, Ben-Gurion turned to me and he says, you know, what sort of a policy is it? No peace and no war. He says, this is a Jewish invention. A leader must decide. Either peace and take the risk, or pay the price, or war and take the risk and pay the price.
In May 1948, Ben-Gurion declared an independent Israel and prepared his troops for imminent war with the Arab states. Peres spent his first of many wars at Haganah headquarters, mobilizing the troops. After the war, Ben-Gurion appointed Peres to run the fledgling Israeli Navy. He was only 26 years old. It was the beginning of a lifetime association with Israel's first prime minister.
An enthusiastic crowd of 1 million people welcomed Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of Israel to New York.
1952. Despite the warm welcome, the fate of Ben-Gurion's nation still hung in the balance. The Arab states did not recognize Israel's sovereignty and threatened invasion. America, along with the rest of the world, remained neutral and refused to sell Israel weapons needed for defense. Away from the news cameras, a young Israeli, 28-year-old Shimon Peres, is also in America. His visa states he is a college student. In fact, he is on a secret mission to supply his country with weapons in any way possible.
We started to develop a small aircraft repair shop at Burbank in California. And there, secretly, we would repair and ship them to Israel. Also, we repaired the Mosquito plane, which is a wooden bomber with 2 engines. And we used to smuggle it out through the northern pole to Israel.
When Ben-Gurion arrived in California, Peres whisked the prime minister away for a close look at the tiny Burbank plant.
He saw it, he couldn't believe it. He says, in such a small place, can you build planes? Yes, we can.
In 1953, Ben-Gurion named the 29-year-old Peres to be Director General of the Defense Ministry, and his close friend Moshe Dayan became the Israeli Chief of the Army.
The Shimon Peres in the early 50s is the person who translated Ben-Gurion's vision to practicality. He created reality structures, the Israeli aircraft. He created the defense framework. He created deeply, a man had enormous energy to translate vision into reality and to make things happen.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, a young colonel named Gamal Abdul Nasser was building a regime of his own, cementing his power on a wave of Arab nationalism. Nasser hoped to lead the Arab and Third Worlds out of Western colonial domination. And for him, Israel was the outpost of that imperialism.
The imminent danger is the Western domination and the Western colonialism. America, France, and England in this part of the world. Israel for the Arab countries now is a sort of menace. I think we have to fight for our security and for our territory. We have to defend ourselves.
Nasser blockaded Israeli ships from using the Suez Canal and sent Egyptian terror squads into the heart of Israel. In the face of this fear, Peres was pressured to find a new source for weapons.
The United States declared an embargo. Britain at the time was rather hostile to Israel. The Soviet Union was against us, actually beginning to supply the arms to the Arabs. And I came to the conclusion that the only chance for us to get arms was France.
In the mid-50s, France was fighting to retain control over its Algerian colony in North Africa. The Algerian resistance was supported by Egypt, and Peres figured that France and Israel, sharing the same enemy, could become friends.
Peres was the initiator and the driving force in developing the relations with the French. And that changed completely overnight our military situations once we could get armaments from France.
I must tell you, I don't know myself how it happened that a man who was relatively young like myself and relatively ignorant, I think I hit the right chord, the right tone.
For the young Peres, it was secret diplomacy and friendships at the highest level, but not without snags. During one of his classified missions, he concluded a sensitive missile deal with French Prime Minister Bourget-Manory. But the French Prime Minister was voted out of office before the contract could be signed.
When he came to the Prime Minister for the signing of the agreement, he was not the Prime Minister anymore. So after working so hard and now losing the project because of the political developments in France, the French Prime Minister said, well, there was nothing I can do. I'm not Prime Minister anymore. I'm sorry, I'm terribly sorry, I apologize, and so on. And Peres suggested to him, what if we sign a document with yesterday's date? And the Prime Minister looked at him and looked at him and looked at him and finally said, bring the document.
By 1956, Nasser became a threat as well to the British, whose colonial empire was collapsing. So Peres took another gamble. He used his personal relations with the French to propose what seemed like an impossible idea: France, Britain, and Israel jointly overthrowing Egypt's Nasser. Several months later, Nasser gave them the excuse. On July 26, 1956, President Nasser announced he had nationalized the Suez Canal, a waterway under French leasehold.
The Suez Canal now becomes a cause of war. Crack French units are embarked at Marseille. Simultaneously, Britain's warplanes are winging their way to Egypt, even as Israel, in a lightning attack, thrusts deep into Egypt to the vicinity of the canal.
The Israelis raced across the Egyptian desert, capturing the entire Sinai Peninsula. But the victory was short-lived. U.S. President Eisenhower had never sanctioned the invasion by his allies and denounced the actions.
Was not consulted in any way about any phase of these actions, nor were we informed of them in advance.
Despite enormous pressure from his countrymen, Ben-Gurion withdrew his entire forces from Sinai, while in Egypt, President Nasser not only survived, but turned Israel's military victory into his own diplomatic triumph and became a third world hero. For Israel, almost a decade of relative peace, and their own hero, Moshe Dayan. Only the very few knew of the other hero of Sinai, for he too had led an army across the desert. A grateful Ben-Gurion named Peres Deputy Defense Minister, and in 1959 he entered politics and the Israeli parliament. His other work, his secret work, was not yet done. In 1958, he quietly persuaded the French to help Israel develop its nuclear capacity. Soon after, the reactor was built in the Negev desert. By 1979, Israel had its ultimate defense, the bomb. For better or worse, the nuclear club had one more member. And to Shimon Peres goes the credit, or the blame. In 1967, the fragile peace ended as Nasser roused his allies into another war against Israel. Before the Arabs could move, the Israelis attacked. The Six-Day War had begun.
that took 3 hours to finish the Egyptian Air Force. And totally after 6 days, we destroyed over 520 enemy aircraft. We had a total of 200 planes, all of them French. Ouragans, Misters, Super Misters, Vautours, and Mirage. Not a single American plane, not a single British plane. And the whole relationship with France was Shimon Peres. The 67 successful campaign with 100% French aircraft was due to his doings, to his diplomacy and his relationship with the French in the years between 1955 and 1967.
The victory brought new territories and euphoria, and the generals received all the glory. But Peres, eager to advance his own political fortunes in the public arena, was having difficulty converting his diplomatic successes into political capital.
The fact that I was charged at a very early age with heavy responsibilities created a great deal of resentment, both by old and by young. And many of them who didn't have the guts to criticize Ben-Gurion did criticize me, accused me about what they think Ben-Gurion was wrong.
Whatever he achieved was always secretive. And he got this image of somebody who operates in the dark. And whenever he was criticized, he could never defend himself, because he couldn't tell, I met yesterday with the French president, or I met yesterday with the German defense minister, because everything was secret at that time. So he was criticized by the opponents of David Ben-Gurion. He was criticized by those who disliked Moshe Dayan, because Moshe Dayan was a legend, and you don't criticize a legend.
And while legends swept across Israel, few paused to notice two extreme political forces slowly emerging. Decades later, they would prove the most difficult challenge for Israel and Shimon Peres. First, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, founded in 1964 to establish an independent Palestine within the borders of both Israel and Jordan. Now they appealed to over 1 million more Arabs within Israel's new borders. The other force to emerge? Israel's right-wing Zionists led by Menachem Begin and forerunners of today's Likud party. They championed a large Israel on the biblical scale, and now, as fantasy became fact, their ideas attracted a following from the mainstream, even from Peres. He had become a junior minister in Golda Meir's labor cabinet in the 1970s. The young hawk led the campaign for settling the occupied territories.
This was the first settlement established in Samaria, as I mentioned, in 1975. Shimon Peres, who is today Israel's prime minister, was the moving factor, I would say the patron saint of this community.
While the right wing planned to annex the territories, Peres envisioned the West Bank as a federation with Jordan. Arabs and Jews would share in local government under Jordanian authority. Israel would maintain scattered military defense posts. With Jordan and Israel cooperating, the PLO presence would disappear.
The problem is a very simple one. Can we or can't we coexist together in a decent, respectable way accepted by both communities?
While Israel and Jordan secretly discussed federation plans, other Arab states had their own agenda. In October 1973, on the holiest day of the Jewish year, the Egyptian and Syrian armies launched a surprise attack, almost defeating Israel, the Yom Kippur War. It was the end of an era marked by the death of its founding father, David Ben-Gurion.
I asked Hans Ben-Gurion when did he feel that he became a leader. He says, the minute I have discovered that I have nobody else to ask a question. So that was my basic feeling. I mean, that time has come for me to provide answers, not questions.
In 1974, he became Minister of Defense in former General Itzhak Rabin's labor government. The United States had replaced France as Israel's main ally and arms supplier. American President Nixon brokered peace between Israel and her Arab neighbors. In Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser had died and was replaced by Anwar Sadat. Sadat had led Egypt to near victory during the Yom Kippur War, and now he was ready to talk peace. But negotiations were more complicated with Jordan. King Hussein had lost the West Bank and East Jerusalem during the Six-Day War, and now he was facing the increasing political power of the PLO. And there was a haunting nightmare in his own past. In 1951, his grandfather, King Abdullah, had been secretly negotiating with Israeli officials and was assassinated by radical dissenters. For Hussein, it would be a lifelong lesson.
In the 70s, King Hussein came here and negotiated, actually came many times to Tel Aviv and negotiations were there. But he demanded full withdrawal.
Hussein insisted Israel withdraw from the entire West Bank and East Jerusalem. Peres led the Hawks in refusing the king's demands. Hussein then turned down Peres' proposals for a West Bank federation. A frustrated American Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, warned Peres that if he didn't give King Hussein something, he would be left to deal only with Yasser Arafat and the PLO. The PLO's accelerated terror operations were indeed occupying Peres' mind. In 1976, he initiated local elections for Arab mayors of West Bank towns, hoping to foster local leadership and independence from the PLO. Peres' plan badly failed. Pro-PLO mayoral candidates swept the elections. While he failed politically to beat the PLO, he was more successful militarily. A few months later, the Entebbe crisis occurred. A jumbo jet with hundreds of Israelis and other nationals was hijacked by Arab and German terrorists to Entebbe in Uganda. Peres initiated a daring rescue mission, but the stakes were enormous, and the Israeli government hesitated to give its go-ahead. Time was running out. Decisively, Peres sent off the Israeli commando rescue team before the official government approval had been voted. (1977). Now leader of the Labor Party and candidate for Prime Minister of Israel. National elections in full swing. The peace process with Egypt, perhaps with Jordan as well. It seemed as if nothing could stop Shimon Peres. But the Labor Party, party of David Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir, having held power since Israel's founding, was treading water, slipping badly at the polls. Leading the opposition, Menachem Begin. He spoke the voice of ultra-nationalism and exploited the frustrations of the Sephardic Jews. They had suffered from persecution in their native Arab countries and became second-class citizens in the labor-dominated Israel. In their frustrations, they perceived the Zionist followers of Ben-Gurion to be weak and elitist. By 1977, the Sephardics had become the majority of Israel, and they voted in large numbers, but not for labor.
And he was alone there on Hiercon Street in the Labor Party headquarters trying to rebuild the shambles of the Labor Party from its debacle at the polls. I remember visiting him a few times there, sitting with him in the office and hearing him talk about the history of the party and what it had been and what it had to become again, and ruefully commenting on how all of his colleagues were scampering to all the four winds and leaving him with the dirty work to do to try to sweep up the pieces of the party after that defeat.
Soon after the elections, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat made the historic move that would later cost him his life. He came to Jerusalem to talk peace.
Let there be no more suffering, no more violence. Peace between Egypt and Israel.
When I saw it, I felt it in a double way, how impossible it is and how simple it is. A few minutes ago, nobody would believe that this can happen. And yet, when you see it in the real terms, it's such a simple move.
Even an old lady like I am will live to see the day.
I've always said this.
You always call me an old lady, Mr. President.
Why wait? Why be hostile? Why fight?
The unconciliatory hawk was changing, and so was the Middle East. Begin and Sadat signed the Camp David Peace Treaty, and Israel would return all of captured Sinai once again. The treaty also called for finding solutions to the Palestinian problems, but it didn't stand a chance before Begin's dream of a large biblical Israel. Begin's government directed new Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. Peres, leading the opposition in the parliament, fought the settlements, but to no avail. It was the beginning of a great divide in Israeli society, and it seeped into the 1981 elections, spilling onto Peres. Once again, Labor's candidate for prime minister.
When I came in and the police stopped me and they says, well, there will be an attempt on your life. There is a group of people who came to kill you. And we beg you not to come. He says, are you crazy? I wouldn't give up under no circumstances. And the more I was attacked and the more stones or tomatoes that were thrown at me, the more decided I became.
עכשיו אגלה לכם סוד, מה שהממשלה הזו אומרת לסוד.
Peres may have spoken the voice of reason, but Begin won the elections.
לא, ודאי! יש לך סיבה לצחוק!
He was very critical of Begin, not only because he disagreed with him, but because he believed that Begin was bringing out the worst in the Israeli public.
מה עם הבריאות שלך, שמעון? בסדר, עצבנות כזאת.
And he also, I'm sure, secretly was a bit jealous that he wasn't able to play to the crowds the way Begin could play to them. The Likud was full of a lot of fairly rough-hewn people, and they didn't play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules.
General Ariel Sharon. He had led a counter-terror unit for David Ben-Gurion in the 1950s. In 1982, he was Begin's defense minister.
We do not have any plans to invade Lebanon.
But that is exactly what the Begin government did on June 6, 1982. For the first time, a significant part of the people did not rally behind their leaders in battle. A little more than a year later, in 1983, a despondent Begin resigned from office. A sobered and deeply divided nation had to choose a new leader. In June 1984, Labor made a comeback victory, but a bittersweet one. The Likud still received almost half the nation's vote. A deal was struck, a coalition government including Labor and Likud, and smaller parties. In theory, representation for all. In practice, a nightmare for effective decision-making. But finally, Peres had become prime minister, if only for half the term. After 2 years, he would hand the office over to Likud's new leader, Itzhak Shamir. Peres would then become foreign minister. To lead such a government was a tough proposition, and so were his goals. Foremost, to make peace with Jordan, and forge a solution to the Palestinian problem, a problem geographically limited to the West Bank and Gaza, but a problem the whole of Israel felt was a threat to its survival as a democratic Jewish state. But first, he had to deal with his political inheritance. A torn nation and a bankrupt economy with over 1,000% inflation, and thousands of Israeli soldiers stuck in Lebanon. He had to solve those crises and heal the nation's wounds before he could ask his countrymen to make the difficult choices that would be part of a lasting peace.
They got involved in a way in which no Israeli prime minister before him. And he was very successful in learning very fast all the intricate problems of the economy and in developing new ideas and new programs which seemed impossible before that and which passed with a surprising easiness in spite of the fact that wages had to be reduced very heavily.
The people of Israel, we have cut their wages and salaries by 20%. It's a very serious business. And they took it in an unbelievable manner. The more we cut, the more the government became popular, which I can't understand, unless the Jewish people enjoy suffering.
The eve of the '84 election, only about 35% thought he was doing a good job. And within several months became prime minister, his percentage rose to 62%. Fairly high percentage in this world, and mounted continuously until it reached a peak in about the middle of '86, almost 80%. That's almost a high in the West.
Building on the growing public trust, he forcefully persuaded his Likud coalition partners to go along with a formal troop withdrawal from Lebanon, except for certain forces left behind to guard against terrorist infiltration.
You had to have somebody with Peres's quite unique ability to work with lots of different people and to keep his temper. And in an Israeli cabinet, keeping your temper is often quite difficult. And thereby to calm the frayed nerves of a country that in 1984 was just on the ragged edge after the Lebanon disasters.
And so the war, Israel's fifth war, a war that had racked the nation's soul, came to an end, and Peres had two stunning victories under his belt. Now he was greeted by chants traditionally reserved for Begin, Peres, King of Israel. Children recited Shakespeare's soliloquy from Hamlet, to be or not to be. Even Mati Barsheshet, who had served a jail term for assaulting Peres during the violent 1981 elections, now asked Peres to be his best man. Now confident and popular, he set out on the road to peace. The years of hatred and division and the example of the late Anwar Sadat had changed the labor hawk, convinced him that Israel was strong enough to give up territories in its quest for both security and peace.
Let's take a small territory. Let's take the Gaza Strip. What do you mean you give up the Gaza Strip? The Gaza Strip is all told 220 miles. You have there 650,000 people living in a very dense territory. What do you mean it belongs to us? Do you have empty room in Gaza? You can close your eyes to the 650,000 Arabs. They are not human beings. They don't have water. They don't have land. They don't have natural resources. They don't have passports. And their heart is not full with love for Israel, obviously.
Nor was there love in East Jerusalem or the West Bank, where loyalties were divided between PLO chief Arafat and King Hussein. Hussein had resumed his secret contacts with Peres, indicating a softening of his all-or-nothing stand. It made the choice of with whom to negotiate easy for Peres.
Politically, I believe you have to make a choice between the king and the PLO. You can't have both together. Because I believe basically the PLO wants to overpower King Hussein and replace him. And if we have to make a choice, who should be our neighbor? A king who is experienced, who has his orientation rooted deeply in the West, or a sort of almost frivolous gentleman like Arafat, with all his coalition of terror. We clearly prefer the king.
Well, I'm not very happy about always being told we want peace, but therefore, I want to try and talk with Jordan, or we want peace, therefore we want to talk with Egypt or Syria, or, where am I? I'm the person under occupation. If you want to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinian nation, then you have to reach an agreement with a person or a party that represents this nation. And nobody represents this nation but the PLO.
But the leadership of the PLO was too drenched in historic blood for Peres to negotiate with. Arafat and the PLO had not recognized Israel. Peres' coalition partners were irrevocably opposed to any territorial concessions. With the help of the Americans, Peres urged King Hussein and non-PLO Palestinians to direct peace talks.
Hussein had a somewhat different agenda. He had already concluded, I'm convinced, that he could not risk direct, open negotiations with Israel until he had the PLO co-opted and supportive.
Now, before, the PLO position was complete rejection. But in '85, King Hussein and Arafat signed an agreement based on the principle territory for peace. That was revolutionary. I've never met such an expression. That is to say, readiness to reach an agreement with Israel.
A few months later, PLO terror struck again. Peres ordered the Israeli Air Force to bomb Arafat's PLO headquarters in Tunisia, almost killing Arafat himself. It was a nightmare for King Hussein, and he refused to meet Peres in direct negotiations. Hussein demanded an international conference in which the United States and the Soviet Union would participate and protect him from the PLO. But in 1985, the American Secretary of State George Shultz was opposed to allowing the Soviet Union any role in Middle East diplomacy. Peres persuaded the Americans that an international forum could be structured in which the Russians could not veto agreements reached between Arabs and Israelis. In October 1985, Peres and Hussein met secretly in London and arranged the details of the international conference. They agreed that the PLO could not participate without recognizing Israel. An optimistic Peres then flew to the United States to formally present his peace initiative.
Famous unfinished painting where the British failed to show up.
We recognize that there is a better opportunity for real progress now than there has been for some time. Prime Minister Peres has made clear Israel's desire for direct negotiations without preconditions, and King Hussein stated here at the White House on September 30th that he welcomes the prospect of beginning negotiations with Israel promptly and directly.
But suddenly, King Hussein presented a new condition. He had been trying to purchase American weapons, an effort blocked by Congress and the Israeli lobby. Secretary of State Shultz was willing to strike a deal. Hussein would get his weapons if he would endorse Peres and the international conference publicly.
Should Hussein go ahead without the PLO?
I'm not going to take your questions on these.
What about the Jordanian arms sale, sir? Is Israel going to support it?
I hereby proclaim the state of war between Israel and Jordan should be terminated immediately. We know there is a Palestinian problem. We recognize the need to solve it honorably. We are convinced that there is no solution but through diplomatic means.
He was applauded abroad.
We do it with pleasure. It's not only for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You should have seen us when you weren't here.
But back in Israel, his right-wing coalition partners totally rejected his peace initiative and called him a traitor.
The international conference is needed for the king in order to squeeze Israel to make that kind of concession which Israel did not agree to make up until now. In other words, this is a mechanism that will allow Jordan in the Arab countries put Israel in the corner, and we will not be able to escape.
לא אמריקה ולא ירדן מציעים ועידה בינלאומית מכתיבה או כופה או לא מוסכמת. ואין לי צורך לא
Peres was ready for a showdown. He recited his initiative and asked where was the treason. Why were Israelis afraid of peace? He asked for a vote of confidence. And he won the vote. Now he was desperate for a positive sign from King Hussein, but the monarch was walking a delicate tightrope. To his north were the Syrians, sworn enemies of any agreement with the Israelis. Yasser Arafat had been unable to get his executive committee to back the peace process. So Hussein turned down the American deal of arms for a public endorsement of Peres and the international conference. Meanwhile, the patience of others wore out. Soon after Hussein's rejection, the Israeli cabinet went into an emergency session with the fate of the coalition very much in the balance. Now the question that haunted Israel was thrust to the foreground. What price for peace? The crisis erupted when former General Minister Ariel Sharon accused Prime Minister Peres of secret and treacherous deals with Jordan's King Hussein.
Secret talks with King Hussein of Jordan.
Any talks that, and the war talks, secret talks behind the back of the government and the inner cabinet, any promises that were given directly or indirectly, nothing of that will happen.
Sharon wanted very much to break the national unity government, hoping that he will be instrumental in it. There'll be a new elections, and he, therefore, could jump to the position of number one, dump Shamir, and become the prime minister. That's quite clear. Now, Shimon Peres, who had a golden opportunity to let Sharon hang himself by his ambitions, resigning, breaking the government, coming to the nation with a statement, look, I have been trying to negotiate and bring peace. Ariel Sharon wants war. The Likud party is the war party. We are the peace party.
The pressure mounted on Peres to fire Sharon and dissolve the coalition, to call for new elections that would probably bring in a labor government, a peace government.
The political moment was very much in his favor. He was in a strong position with the electorate. He was really riding the crest of the wave of his own political prestige at that stage. He was evidently preoccupied with the need to protect his own credibility as a person and to keep his word about transferring power at the end of 2 years to Shamir.
A terrible dilemma. If you break the government, aha, Shimon Peres wants to become prime minister with the Labour Party and without a national unity government. If he doesn't break the government, people are saying, well, of course. He'll take anything from Sharon to stay in power. So whatever you do, you're damned.
He was hedging his bets. It was eerily reminiscent of the time Ben-Gurion had faced a similar test of wills. Ben-Gurion had resigned. Now Peres hesitated. He gave General Sharon the chance to apologize and save the coalition from breaking up. The general obliged willingly.
Shimon Peres, he didn't go for the kill when the whole country expected him to do that. I think that was an opportunity which he missed to establish himself for a long time as a leader, and maybe that was the turning point in which he lost the fight for the peace process.
When he was prime minister and had an agreement with Hussein 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, he should have either pushed it or resigned the government. And now he's a suffering, miserable minister of finance.
Why do you think he didn't do it?
Because he didn't have enough balls to do it.
During his last months of office, Sharon resumed denouncing Peres as a traitor, and the PLO continued to carry out terrorist activities. Peres held another secret meeting with King Hussein, promising to break his coalition government if the peace process would not continue. Hussein offered nothing new. Still, Peres kept on racing after the king, but all the international support could not save the peace process. And on schedule in September 1986, Likud's Itzhak Shamir became prime minister. Peres became the foreign minister.
Peres went ahead with what he felt was vital for Israel, try to get into negotiations with Hussein in some framework. And Shamir very much disagreed with him about what he was doing and tried to stop him. Peres wouldn't be stopped.
6 months later, in April 1987, Peres caught up with King Hussein in London, where they signed a historic document guaranteeing face-to-face, open-ended negotiations between Jordan, the Palestinians, and Israel.
When one begins to speak about peace, he begins peace. Peace begins by speaking. Peace begins by negotiating. And for the last 40 years, we tried to negotiate in vain. Here you have the first opportunity to negotiate directly, meaningfully, in order to arrive at peace.
But it didn't happen. Shamir, the prime minister, with his Likud colleagues, is dead set against that game plan and speaks out publicly denouncing it. And Peres, as foreign minister, didn't have enough political clout to force that agreement through the Likud half of the government, as he had been able to force through at the time of the Lebanon withdrawal. And he was totally stymied.
Peres did not break the coalition government as he had promised King Hussein he would. In history, opportunities don't wait. And at the end of that year, in 1987, the frustrated Palestinians in the occupied territories took to the streets in their uprising, the Intifada. King Hussein read the writing on the wall. Soon after, he withdrew from representing the Palestinians in any peace negotiations and renounced Jordan's claim to the West Bank territory.
No chance!
Still, Shimon Peres pressed on into the 1988 elections, again as Labor's candidate, making the issue of trading land for peace a national referendum, and himself the target of bitter controversy. In campaign commercials, the architect of Israel's security was accused of leading Israel to destruction and selling its soul to the devil.
Peres is make trouble. It's no good for Israel. Peres no good for Israel because Peres he want Arab. He want give the Arab in my country.
It's not fair. It's not fair to be afraid in my own country.
And that's not easy for a leader to change the psyche of people who've resigned themselves to fatalism. As I recall, when one army general was telling the Minister of Education, we have to train our high school students to know that we were going to live in perpetual war. Now, to build a society to believe in peace when you don't see it, and after going through so many wars.
Now, I would expect Peres to explain to the Israelis that we are not alone here, that not only our aspirations will be met, that there are Palestinians here, and that the Palestinians are human beings as others, and that they won't agree that only the Jews deserve to have a state.
The Jews cannot be healed by a Jewish psychiatrist. I need Palestinians to speak in a way which makes me feel that it's not my own hope that's leading me to believe this, but that there's voices in reality telling me trust, trust. And that's what Shimon Peres was trying to do, and it's going to take a while. We have to trust.
Peres made the peace effort the central election issue for the first time in Israel's history. But maybe because there were no peace partners, maybe because of his own actions, the people voted their fears, not their hopes. Another coalition government with the Likud holding the premiership for the entire 4-year term. But 2 years later, in the spring of 1990, Peres toppled a crippled government with a historic vote of no confidence. Still, he lost his bid to regain the prime minister's office, and with that, his dream of personally leading his nation to peace. Yet some hope exists. The PLO gave up demanding all of the land Israelis live on and has accepted the right of Israel to exist.
Concerned in the Middle East conflicts to exist, including the State of Palestine, Israel, and other neighbors.
And in the occupied territories, certain Palestinian leaders have joined some Israelis on the road to peace.
I was building a strength so we shall be able to build a peace, not to build a war. And I think Israel is today strong enough to try our hands in achieving peace. I was dreaming about it all my life.